I've been making God of War videos for 4 years now, and while I've had a lot of fun making theories and lore videos, I never actually made a review of the game when it came out. This is mostly because much better game reviewers had given their opinion, and I thought the game was, for the most part, a really good experience, so I didn't think it was necessary for me to praise it further. Instead, I decided to focus on the game's most important departure from the old games in the series, its approach to lore and story. I truly believe God of War Ragnarok will not only be an amazing game, but an event that all of us remember for the rest of our lives. Very similar to how people regard Star Wars Return of the Jedi or Avengers Endgame. This is thanks to God of War 2018 setting up the story so well. Will Kratos die? What is the role of Loki's prophecy? What about Freya's vengeance? And of course, who blew the horn? That's not to say that everything in the game is perfect. The combat is one of those things that has divided the fanbase. Well, it's not really divided, but I want to talk about why the 22% of fans don't like the RPG system. But this whole idea of making a brief review for the combat began after I reacted to Under the Mayo's review of God of War 2018. And this was personally an interesting experience for me, because a lot of my fans thought I agreed with him a little bit too much for their liking. Some people really think I outed myself as a God of War 2018 hater, which is far from the truth. But longtime fans of the channel know that I've always had my reservations regarding some changes Santa Monica did, especially with the addition of the RPG system. So I just wanted to make this video to speak on behalf of everyone who voted for fewer RPG mechanics in my poll. There's a lot of misunderstanding between the two camps, and I wanted to address why the 22% of God of War fans don't think RPG elements should be included or at least be simplified. Also because Under the Mayo has agreed to do a podcast with me to discuss our thoughts on the new combat in a calm and reasonable manner. So I thought it was only fair if he saw a video where I expressed my thoughts on the combat just like I did with his. Now this video of course is not gonna be as long as his, and that's because I only wanted to focus on the topic of combat. There's a lot to talk about regarding platforming as well as puzzle design, but I'm gonna save those topics for the podcast. So with this super long intro out of the way, let's get to the video. If someone were to ask me if I like God of War 2018's combat, my answer would have to be yes and no at the same time. Yes, because I believe this combat still has that playful characteristic that old God of War games had with juggling enemies as well as happy accidents. I don't think I have to explain juggling to anyone, but it's the ability to set up your enemies in the air and just juggle them around. Doing this gives you that childhood feeling you got when keeping a balloon up in the air by punching or kicking it. It becomes this internal goal to just try and keep the enemy in the air for as long as you can. Nothing's gonna happen if you drop him, but it's fun to do. Old school God of War games give you the ability to jump in order to keep this feeling going. God of War 2018 changes jumping for a freezing effect that keeps the enemies floating for a little bit longer. Both are different, yet you can tell they were created by the same developer. The other thing I really like about God of War 2018's combat is the happy accidents. These are small combat details that the game never tells you about and just lets you experiment with them as you find them during your adventure. An example of happy accidents from the old games in the series can be found with the Minotaurs from God of War 3. If you launch them into the air, then slam them back down with circle, their horns will momentarily be stuck in the floor. This allows you to get a few more hits before he's back on his hooves. God of War 2018 has these moments as well. When the trolls are growling at Kratos, you can simply throw the axe at their forehead and this will concuss them for a little bit, once again giving you some more time to wail on them. If you throw your axe at the legs of the Draugrs, they will fall to their knees. You can also freeze some enemies and Sparta kick them against a wall to break them. In addition to these happy accidents, you have what I consider straight up bangers of upgrades, like the Hunter Killer ability that lets you tag up to 8 targets and lets the Leviathan axe distract them for a little bit while you go and use the blades on other enemies. This might sound overpowered, but the game adds enough pressure from surrounding enemies that forces you to let go of the axe if an enemy is about to attack. There's also the Executioner's Cleave that leaves you open to be attacked while Kratos charges a powerful attack. Timing this move before an enemy is about to hit you is one of the most satisfying feelings I've ever had in any game's combat. And since I haven't given the blades much love in this video, I have to mention at least one of its moves. My favorite being the Elemental Explosion, which sets up multiple enemies by launching them into the air. You can also make use of the free camera to place these exploding balls almost on any surface, allowing you to place traps for approaching enemies. In my opinion, Santa Monica did what Capcom did with Resident Evil 4. They managed to make an action game with a camera this close to the protagonist that still retains the playfulness of its previous games in the series, while making it more deliberate and personal. God of War needed to change, and I think what Santa Monica did with God of War 2018 was a step in the right direction. That's not to say it was perfect, there are small things that definitely slipped through the cracks. The big one being the speed in which it takes Kratos to change weapons. God of War 3 solved this problem by designating L1 and X as the input to cycle through weapons in a quick and stylish manner. Also, the cooldowns are way too exploitable, resulting in many players just cycling through the runic attacks to kill an entire group of enemies without really interacting with the combat properly. God of War Ragnarok really needs to fix these issues for a smoother combat, but at this moment, this is all I can think of that Ragnarok needs to fix urgently. And from the trailer, we already know that they're making some significant changes to the combat system, like the return of the grapple, that has me truly excited. Eric Williams was a combat consultant for some time, so I'm sure the one thing the game is guaranteed to have is an improved combat system. That is, if they do something about this. Yeah, this is what I meant by when I said I didn't like God of War's combat. I'm okay with the meaty part of the playful combat and happy accidents, but it's the RPG system that really bothers me. My dislike of this system is manifested the most when streaming a fight against a Valkyrie and someone comments in the chat, "No wonder you're losing against her, look at your stats." You have no idea how much I hate this comment. As someone who has been playing games for a long time, I find this comment really insulting. Because it implies that I don't have the skills to kill her, instead I should go and beef my stats up if I want to have a chance. Do you remember all that good stuff I talked about the combat, the playfulness, the happy accidents, the useful upgrades? Well, when an RPG system is introduced, a lot of people tend to forget about these things and just focus on the grind. Fans of this RPG system say things like, you need a runic build if you want to defeat Sigram, or use a Zeus build if you want to kill her. Why? So I can go in the fight, use all of my runic attacks and kill her in 10 seconds? Sure, it looks stylish, but that's not really fun. I prefer to sit there and learn all of her patterns, that way when I beat her, it feels more rewarding. I honestly don't understand why people like this idea of making builds. Why do you want to only use magic? Or why do you want your cooldown to be almost zero? Sure, that's variety, but I'm not sure it's good variety. It's just different ways to break the game. I like to engage with mechanics and learn enemy patterns instead. This, my friends, this is why I don't like RPGs. And look, it's not just me and Under the Mayo who complain about the RPG system in God of War 2018. I know of at least 2 great reviewers that have talked about this issue before.
New Game Plus introduces Draugrs with randomized enhancements, which is a much more engaging way of increasing the challenge, but by that point the RPG mechanics have eroded all sense of balance.
This is how much gear matters in this game. I don't like that. I want to be the one who gets better and masters the game's combat, not the character I am controlling by putting on better gear via crafting or grinding.
Now at this point in the video, you're probably thinking I'm starting to sound like an old dude who doesn't want things to change. But I know that Santa Monica Studios couldn't keep making the same type of God of War game. By the time of Ascension's release, this combat system was getting outdated. One of its biggest issues was the lack of replayability. After you finished the game, there was not much you could do. Sure, you could play with the Athena skin after you beat the game, but that wouldn't really add anything to gameplay. Or you could play the game plus, but being this overpowered this early gets boring real quick. Now the plot twist here is that the solution to the problem of replayability is having an RPG system, but a much simpler one in a God of War game. This is something Visceral Games had the foresight to fix with Dante's Inferno, a game that heavily borrows from God of War. The developers of that game had the foresight to add RPG elements with their RPG system. I really forgot what it was called. This system provided players with ways to slightly customize how they wanted to play the game. So for those fans that don't like the idea of an RPG system at all, I hate to say this, but RPG elements were always going to make their way into the God of War series. The question is, was this system the right one? In my opinion, it wasn't, because it made the game way too easy. What I would do is get rid of the enchantments completely. These are way too specific and they really break the immersion when you have to go into a menu and spend 10 minutes looking for the one that fits your build. Next is drastically changing the armor system. As an example of an ideal armor system, let's look at Ghost of Tsushima. Every time you find an armor, for one thing, it comes in one piece. Each one of them has a specific and clear characteristic that sets it apart from the others. And they are also freaking beautiful. This is seen best when you level them up and their appearance changes to make them look even more powerful. Compare that to God of War's armor system. Every time you open a chest, you get a piece of armor that, for one thing, is level locked, might not look that good, and its attributes are too specific. This type of armor system is one that I expected to see in a game like The Witcher or Skyrim, not a semi-open story-driven game. So for God of War Ragnarok, I really hope they take inspiration from Ghost of Tsushima. Now the last thing I need to talk about are the talismans and pummels, and honestly, I think they were a great addition to customizing the combat to however you wanted to play the game without breaking it. But much like the armors, they should also get rid of putting levels next to them. For example, my favorite talisman in the game was the Amulet of Kasavir, which gives you the ability to briefly stop time if you dodge right before an enemy is about to hit you. The feeling you get after successfully doing this dodge is just amazing. But this is a talisman you get pretty early in the game. Halfway through the game I felt pressured into changing it because I found a talisman that, while I didn't like, it did have a higher level. Once again, I want to be able to beat the enemies based on my skill and mastery of the combat, not the stats I picked up by opening a chest. I know this wasn't a comprehensive review of the game's combat, because the truth is, I'm not a game reviewer. I've just been obsessing about the addition of RPG elements since day one, and Under the Mayo has finally given me a reason to talk about them in a video. Again, there are many other things that we need to discuss when talking about combat and gameplay in general, but I wanted to save those topics for my talk with Mayo. And don't worry, we're gonna be talking about incentive, the topic Mayo is most passionate about. But that video will most likely be uploaded next Sunday, as I'm trying real hard to stick with this new schedule I set for myself. But with that said, I really hope I accomplished my goal with this video, which is to open an interesting discussion between both camps, and realize that both of them are a little bit right and a little bit wrong. The goal is to find a middle ground between fans who like a customization of an RPG system with fans who enjoyed a tight and rewarding gameplay experience. I think if we do this, God of War's combat is gonna be much better for it. But anyway, as always, I want to give a big thanks to all of my members for supporting the channel monthly. People like User, Punched, SaberTalk, Goldening, and Carl Beeman, to name a few, are truly the backbone of this channel. I still can't believe that people like my content so much that they're willing to support me monthly. With that said, I would also like to thank everyone who likes and shares my videos. I know it doesn't seem like much, but trust me guys, it really does help with me in the algorithm. So with that said, don't forget to subscribe if you like God of War content, and as always remember, go forth in the name of Ragnarok.